Hey everyone, welcome to the Tried and Truly podcast, where you'll find encouragement, community, and biblical truth from the God that truly never fails. Let's get started. Hey guys, you're tuned in to the Tried and Truly podcast, and Lori and I are so thrilled today to welcome Jill Savage to the show. Jill is a wife, a mom, author of 14 books, host of the No More Perfect podcast, and she really has a passion to encourage, educate, and equip families in all stages of life. Jill founded the Hearts at Home ministry, which was built to provide encouragement and support to moms, and she is now a relationship and marriage coach. You're clearly a busy lady, so thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Absolutely. I'm glad that this worked out.
Yeah, me too.
And we're so excited for many reasons. And I'll tell you, Jill, one of the most important reasons is when Michelle and I were kind of dreaming up our podcast, we were thinking about what could we do and what does this look like? And she said, wouldn't it be cool if one day Jill Savage came on our podcast?
No joke.
Like, you totally fulfilled that dream for us because boom, a year later, here you are. So we're so excited.
Oh, good.
Well, and Michelle and I, we pretty much span the seasons of parenting. Baby Everett is 6 months old, and then my oldest is 19, and we have some kids scattered in between there as well. One of the things we kind of joke about at our house is, and my 19-year-old's in on the joke, but we always think back of like, what were the most difficult years raising her, right? Because she's almost grown. And it was like 8 3/4, the entire year of 15, and then about 17 3/4. And so I love it. Yeah. Now that your kids are grown, I'm just wondering like what ages were the most challenging for you to parent through?
Oh, I think it depends on the child. I really do. I think that the kids really make the difference because, child number one, so easy until she hit 17. 17, her senior year, I remember thinking, it is time for you to leave. It really is. It is just time for you to leave. It was the weirdest thing. And so I was just like, I could have written the book on parenthood until she was like 17. And then I was like, whoa, we're done. Our son, our second oldest, I'd say he was 15, and we started having some challenges. And, he was skipping classes, and he was, just trying to see what he could get away with. Our daughter, number 3, okay, her newborn year, she was so colicky. She cried for 6 months, and I cried for 6 months. I mean, it was really hard. And then her teen years were rough as well. And then our youngest, he was pretty easygoing. We had a lot of trouble with him with video games, probably 5th, 6th, 7th grade, just finding a balance with that kind of stuff. And then our adopted son, pretty easygoing until high school. But we adopted him when he was 9. So pretty easygoing until high school. But high school, we actually started dealing with some mental health issues. And he's now 26. And quite frankly, it's still difficult. So, they're all different.
Yeah.
And the experience is different for each one.
So what I'm getting from that is that all my hard years are ahead of me.
Absolutely.
Great. Awesome. Okay. So with that in mind, Jill, then what is the one piece of advice, one lesson that you, looking back, wish you would have known when you were raising your young family? Tell us your secrets that we can employ today.
Oh, I think my number one thing I wish I would have known, and I would have understood earlier, was to really get to know my kids as individuals. I feel like I parented the herd. I saw them as a group, and I made sure that the group went to church, and I made sure that the group got to school, and that the group had their school clothes and their school supplies. But I will say it was late in the game where I really got to know them as the individuals that they are. And so I wish I would have done that a lot earlier and really learn to lead them based upon who they are. Because, I mean, we did that somewhat. You certainly see temperaments and personalities, and you begin to realize, hey, this works better with this kid than it does with this kid. But to really get to know the way that God has wired them and made them, that makes a huge difference. And I wish I would have done that a lot earlier.
Mm, that's
awesome.
good.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I have made up for that now that they're adults, because here's what I do want parents to know. It's never too late to do the right thing. It's never too late. So you can, wish you had done that a lot earlier, but it's still effective for you to do the right thing now. So I now really see them as the individuals they are, and I interact with them based upon their temperament and their personality. So it's never too late, but I do wish I'd done that a lot earlier.
That's great advice. Yeah.
That is so good. Okay, Jill, so let's talk about No More Perfect. The name of your podcast is the No More Perfect Podcast, and several of your books are centered around this idea of no more perfect as well. No more perfect moms, no more perfect kids, and then no more perfect marriages. So I'm just curious to know, how did you tap into this idea of no more perfect? And then how did this idea of no more perfect relate to your own life?
Well, I only write about things that I made mistakes in. And that's why I have 14 books. I could actually have a lot more than that, but I've put multiple mistakes in each book. So I struggle with the perfection infection myself. That's what I talk about in No More Perfect Moms, is that I believe we all struggle with it to some degree, but I was a firstborn, natural perfectionist, high achiever. And so just that whole concept of feeling like I need to be perfect at everything that I do, expecting perfection of my kiddos, and that doesn't work well. Ultimately, that's why I wrote No More Perfect Kids. So when people say, what's the perfection infection? The perfection infection is when we have unrealistic expectations of ourselves, or we unfairly compare ourselves to others. And what we do often in comparison is we compare our insides to other people's outsides. And when we do that, we come up with wrong conclusions. So, so ultimately, No More Perfect Moms looks at that perfection infection in ourselves. Where do I have unrealistic expectations of myself? And where am I comparing myself to others unfairly? But then No More Perfect Kids looked at, well, what happens when the perfection infection invades our parenting and we have unrealistic expectations of our kids and we unfairly compare them to others? And a lot of times people are like, well, who am I comparing them to? And I'm like, well, you're comparing them to people in the neighborhood, kids in the neighborhood. You're comparing them to other kids at your kids' school. You're comparing them to the well-behaved children you see at church. Of course, you're not seeing those children all the time. You compare them to your child that's easier to parent. Or you even compare them to the imagined child in your head that you were just sure was going to show up and never has. And so ultimately, I had to begin to stop that. I had to learn how to accept my kids for who they were. I had to stop having unrealistic expectations of them. And then No More Perfect Marriages, what happens when the perfection infection invades marriage and you have unrealistic expectations of your husband or of your marriage in general, and what happens when you compare your marriage to other marriages. So we're always dealing with this perfection infection. And so I began to kick that out of my life, kick it out of my parenting, and to kick it out of my marriage. And the more I did that, the more I experienced contentment and freedom. I really knew that because I was experiencing that, I wanted others to experience that. And ultimately, that's why I wrote the books. It would help people to become more content with their real, imperfect, sometimes messy life.
Mm-hmm. So how do we go about starting to kick out that perfection infection?
Yeah. Well, the first thing you do is you recognize that it's there.
Yeah.
You start to examine your expectations. And oftentimes people say, well, how do I know if I have unrealistic expectations? And what I usually say is, where are you continually discontent? In what child are you always disappointed in?
Mhm.
Where in your marriage are you always disappointed or discontent?
Mm-hmm.
Where in your life, or like, every time you look in the mirror and you look at your imperfect body, are you always discontent with it? Those are the places that you probably have unrealistic expectations. One of I call them the antidotes to the perfection infection. One of the antidotes is acceptance. We have to learn how to accept our imperfect body, to accept our child the way that they are, and that they're going to be different than we are, to accept our spouse the way they are, and that they are going to be different than we are as well. So we began to apply these antidotes. Acceptance, compassion is another one. We have compassion for the differences. We have compassion for the places in our life that are not what we want them to be. Forgiveness is another antidote. Like when you bump up against somebody else's imperfection, forgiveness is a way to handle it. Grace is a way to handle it. I like to say that we need to give our family grace space, and they need the grace to be human, to make mistakes, and to not get picked over the coals for every little thing that they do wrong or different than us.
It makes me think of the weekend I just had because I have this problem that I call it the hallmark moments because we'll have something coming up, right? No matter what it is. And this weekend we were going up to visit my daughter at college. And so I like build up this experience in my head, just like the Hallmark movies, right? Like it's going to be
Yes.
awesome. We're going to laugh and like eat all this great food. And in reality, my girls bickered the entire time. The youngest one whined that she was tired of walking. And I thought we're sightseeing and and then I'm going to be honest, by the end of the night, I cried in the hotel room in front of both my
Yep.
girls. And I'm like, I took off work and spent money on this hotel room to have fun with you, and you guys have complained. So it's not really like them. It's just that I build up these situations in my head
Yep.
that the situation has to be a 12 to meet my expectations when an 8 like would have been great.
Yep. So if you had gone into that, Lori, if you had gone into that actually telling yourself, my girls are likely going to bicker,
Mm,
then it would have changed your expectations. So that's what needs to happen is when we have unrealistic expectations and then there's reality and the space in between is discontentment. So what
yes.
we need to do is we need to bring our expectations more in line with reality. So we're going to have fun. We're going to have a good time. But I need to expect that they are teenage girls and they will probably get on each other's nerves.
Mhm.
I need to expect that they're teenage girls and they're probably going to get on my nerves.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
so if I expect that, then when it shows up, I'm not going to be disappointed
Yeah.
because I was expecting something that was much more real. And
Mhm.
so I think that's the key. And you're right. I love that you have a name for it, the hallmark moments. I mean, I think it is where movies, and I'm not anti-movie and I'm not anti-television, but I do think that it sets up expectations of us that we don't even realize.
Mm.
We watch a movie and, you see romance in movies. You don't see that the guy doesn't pick up his socks and
Yeah.
leaves his underwear on the floor. I mean, you don't see that, but
Yeah.
that's real stuff of life. And,
Mhm.
we're in the checkout line at the grocery store and there's a cover of a magazine and it has this headline and, it's got this, beautiful picture of a celebrity and a headline that says body after baby, 3 months.
Yeah.
And then we look at ours and go, body after baby, 3 years. Like,
Yeah.
or in my case, like 33 years, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, it never looked like that. But here's the deal. Her body actually doesn't look like that either, because that thing has been photoshopped. So
Right.
here we are comparing ourselves to something that isn't real.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's those, I mean, I think you've appropriately named it Hallmark moments, because when we watch a Hallmark movie, yeah, sure, they have a little bit of, there might be like, that moment where there's a little bit of conflict, but it always gets
Oh, yeah.
resolved.
Right.
Always.
And right. And so what we have to realize is that's kind of setting us up for those unrealistic expectations. And we really have to battle against that.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back for a second, Jill, to what you said about grace and giving our family grace. I think that a lot of moms with young kids that fight a lot, we get confused about grace versus discipline.
Mm.
And like, if they are, misbehaving, oh, we'll give them grace. We'll let it go. Like, but I've come to realize that you can have grace and discipline. And I
Yes.
think that's how God designed it. So I just wanted to check in with you and see if you could like elaborate on, clear this up for us. We can have grace, we can have discipline. It's not an either or situation.
Yeah. I like to use, instead of the word discipline, I like to use leadership.
Ooh, I like that.
I like to use
Good.
leadership. I think we need to lead our kids well. And yes, does that sometimes mean a consequence if,
Mhm.
it was inappropriate? Sometimes it is. But I really think as parents, we need to think of ourselves as leaders. And so what we have to do is we have to discern between what really matters and what doesn't. Because, oftentimes I think one of the best things we can go is, will this matter in 10 years?
Oh, that's good.
If so, then by all means, lead well
Mhm.
through it. Will this not matter in 10 years? Then let it go.
Mm.
I think sometimes we cause our own conflict as parents. And so, I don't know, let's say that our kids are, they're just rowdy. Okay. They're just rowdy. And what do? Like, we're stressed. And so then we become the mommy monster. And and so in that moment, we have to catch ourselves and go, will this matter in 10 years? No, the problem is actually
Mm.
me. The problem is me right now. I need a time out. I need to step outside. I need to take a deep breath. And then, if I need to ask them to calm down or ask them to go to their rooms and wrestle rather than down here, that's fine. I can do that. But if they're being disrespectful to me or they're calling each other names, will that matter in 10 years? By all means, it will. So lead through it, lead through that. What we want to do, though, is respond, not react,
Mm.
because we only lead well when we respond. We don't lead well when we react. That may mean that if our kids are accustomed to us opening God's word about what God's word says about our words, maybe
Mhm.
we do that. Maybe we tell them to go back and have that conversation again and do it without calling names.
Yeah.
I mean, there's lots of ways that we can lead through that. But I think a lot of times we have to ask ourselves, am I the problem here?
Mm.
Or will this really matter? And then how do I need to lead through it? And the Lord gives us the direction. That's sometimes those are the moments of arrow prayers. Like, okay, God, I don't even know what to do with this one. You're going to have to give me something because I don't know how to lead through this, but He will show you. All you have to do is ask, and He will show you.
That's good.
And I'll add one thing. And if you don't know what to do, just tell them that they need to go to their room, that they're not in trouble. Like, I need you to just go to your room while I figure out what we're going to do about this situation.
Mm.
I like to call that the it never hurts to let them sweat principle.
That's good. That's good.
You know, Jesus and I and your dad are going to figure out what we're going to do about this.
I like that.
And so, I'm not quite sure for right now. I just need you to go ahead and go up to your room, and
Yep.
Jesus and your dad and I are going to figure this
That's good.
That's awesome.
one out.
Staying on the discipline track here. So Proverbs 29:17 says, discipline your kids, and they will give you peace of mind and will make your heart glad. So good kids from good homes still make bad choices, and especially during the teen years. And there's just so many influences out there. So even
Yep.
when, we're doing our best to guard them from that and making sure, they're walking in the truth, sometimes it's just they're going to make bad choices and sometimes really bad choices. So, what advice do you give to a parent if their child is perceived as the bad influence or the bully or the bad kid? Not only like how do they help their kid, but how do they deal with the judgment and criticism from other parents?
Yeah. Well, we've been there. So we've definitely been there. And number one, it's very important that you don't move into defense mode and try to get your kid out of trouble.
Mm,
Because I think a lot of times we raise up and then we want to defend. And I'm not talking about if your child has been falsely accused. That's different,
Mm.
right? But I mean, it's tough to
mhm,
say, this makes me really sad that this is my child. And so we do have to be willing to accept the responsibility of that. The second thing that happens is then what we don't want to do is we do not want to parent out of shaming our child.
mm,
We don't want to parent out of embarrassment because we will be an ineffective parent. So a perfect example of this one is I got a call from the principal when one of our boys was in seventh grade. Mrs. Savage, are you aware your son brought a weapon to school? I was like, what?
See,
Oh, weapon?
you have the wrong
We
number.
don't even have weapons. Wait a minute. Yeah, like, wait a minute. She said my name. Oh my gosh, this is for real. And so I'm like, what? And she says, yes, he brought a pocket knife to school. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I understand. I understand why this is an issue. And I also know which child this is. The one that we've told to not take the pocket knife to school, like, 500 times. And
Right.
she says, yes, we have a zero tolerance for weapons. So he's suspended for 3 days. And so I have to go get him. I got to bring him home. And I'm going to tell you, I'm ticked. I'm ticked. And it wasn't until I actually went with some friends that night out to dinner. And I ended up telling them that, he was suspended. And each one of them kind of told me their bad kid story. Like, oh, Jill, we've had that happen. And here's what happened. And oh, this happened. And here's what happened. And I'll tell you what, just being with other moms that were honest,
Mhm,
I went home and I no longer led him out of anger and embarrassment.
Mm.
I led him so much more effective because I wasn't angry and embarrassed by it. So I think that we have to accept the reality that that will happen on occasion. It isn't the way that we raised them, but they are trying to figure out this world. It isn't a reflection of us. I know it feels that way. And I know that, you know, the community, when we have children that are underage, we are responsible for them, right? But at the same time, we have to also be careful to not take it personally, because the minute you take it personally, you become an ineffective parent.
mhm.
I think that's really, really key. And as far as judgment from other parents, it is possible. But what God says about who we are is what's most important. And so you really this is where our identity in Christ has to be really strong, and it has to be able to stand up under the pressure of the possibility of judgment from others.
That's really good.
That reminds me, Jill, of what you wrote in No More Perfect Moms when you wrote that control is a mirage. Like you cannot control your kids. And when I read that, that was like a core shaking realization like, oh, it's not my fault that they're misbehaving. It's not my fault that they're acting crazy. And it's a freeing thing to know that
It
you can't
is.
control your kids. But
Yeah.
of course I forget that all the time. And like the situation with your son, that's like that's like a big kid problem. I have little kid problems right now. So I'm thinking of like
Mhm.
the example of, you're at the library at story time and everyone is sitting perfectly, behaving like an angel. And then my son is running around screaming and yelling. And the last thing he wants to do is sit and listen to a story, that he didn't even care about. But instead of focusing on him, it's so easy to be like, oh, this is humiliating. Doesn't my son care about my
Right.
feelings right now? I'm so mortified. And it leads to the feeling of I'm not a good mom because all these other parents have these perfect kids. And, it's like, is my kid's behavior a reflection of my ability to be a good mom?
No, it isn't. And we can't, yes, are there times where it's like, I should have handled that better?
Mhm.
Sure, we all have those moments. I mean, hindsight is always 2020. But for sure, and that's a moment where you could parent out of embarrassment.
Right.
And it would not be nearly as effective as if you would just lead him. If you would
Mhm.
just lead him well. And
Yeah.
sometimes in those moments, if you feel like people are looking at you, Dr. Kevin Lehman said this. I love Dr. Kevin Lehman. He said, when you're in the grocery store and your kids are, kids throwing a temper tantrum and you step over them, resisting the urge to step on them. And then you look up at the nice people that are all looking at you and smile and simply say, we're working on this. We're working on this. And you just smile and you just say, we're working on this.
Mm.
We're working on this.
Yeah.
So you just,
I love
kind
that.
of, you're reassuring yourself at the same time that
Yeah.
you're reassuring others. We're working on this. We got
Yeah. I like that. I like that. That's a good response instead of, like you mentioned, the mommy monster. And I'm sure in the grocery store, the mommy monster stays hidden away until you get home. And I just want to talk about like anger
Mm.
because honestly, I feel like if I oftentimes I'm not louder than they are, they won't hear me. And then it
Mm.
immediately leads to feelings of regret. I never feel good when I lose my temper, but it's a struggle, like, I think for a lot of moms with little kids, especially boys, I wanna say. Laura,
Right.
you have girls, Laura, you have little
Hey, I'm
angels,
a
so you
yeller
don't
that
know.
no. Sometimes I like have a coughing attack because I'm yelling so loud. And then I'm like, wait, I think that's God telling me to be quiet right now. He's taking
Oh
the
my
air
gosh.
from me.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I just did a podcast episode on my No More Perfect podcast on anger. So we should definitely link
Yeah.
over in the
Yeah,
show notes on this.
absolutely. Yes.
But I think one of the best things that we can do, number one, is to step away. In those moments, we need to step away. And when I say step away, I'm talking, you only may need 30 seconds. Okay.
Mhm.
And I find that stepping outside is the absolute best. And it's really effective if it's like, 20 degrees below zero outside.
Yeah.
I mean, because that just kind of hits you in the face and
Yep.
it you just step away enough into the big world outside and you go, okay, what's happening in there is not as a big deal as what I think it is.
Mm.
Again, I need to lead well. So I always say pause, ponder, proceed. So I'm going to pause and step outside. I'm going to ponder if this is going to matter in 10 years. Is this my problem? Like, am I the one stressed out here?
Mhm.
And then I'm going to proceed. I'm going to lead well. The other thing I would say that I have not personally used, I wasn't a huge yeller. So I yelled, don't hear me wrong. I yelled plenty of times. But for those that really want to turn that around, like they're yelling a lot, is to actually use whispering in its place.
Mm.
And because your kids have to listen a lot, and it just flips the script for them, and it may surprise you, but I find that it works really well for some of the friends that I have that have utilized it.
That's good. Yeah, because screaming, "Stop yelling," shockingly doesn't work. I mean, like,
Nope.
I can't yell at them to not yell. Like, that's a realization I've made one too many times.
Right. You're telling them to stop
Yeah,
doing the very thing that you're
exactly.
doing. And so,
Exactly.
yeah, sometimes parents just need to be creative. I don't know if you've ever been in a classroom where the kids are yelling and it's super loud, and the teacher will start clapping,
Mhm.
and then the kids will echo it
Mhm.
back. As parents, we can use those kind of techniques to to just get everybody focused and listening to what it is that we have to say. So sometimes we just need to be a little bit more creative.
Mhm.
We just fall into the ruts of yelling.
One of the creative things you said, get creative. This is one thing that we do on vacations. We should really do it all the time, but we have a rule on vacation that if someone is starting to like become too much, like too annoying, too whiny, I should have used it this past weekend. Instead of telling the person like, get it together, you're annoying me, we just had like a code word. And so we would pick caramel corn. And you just would randomly say caramel corn. And then like people like everybody loves caramel corn,
Mhm.
it's just like, oh, I'm being a brat. But like you're still thinking about caramel corn. It actually works.
Right. I love
That's
that.
funny.
And that is creative for sure. Yeah, I love that.
All right. This is a question really, I mean, it starts when kids are young, but it's something that I've been thinking a lot about now that I have an adult child. It's, children are a blessing, and the Bible's very clear that we should be raising them up to know the Lord, teaching them how to walk in faith. But how do we, I guess, create space for that? So, like, my relationship with God has definitely deepened over the 40 some years because, of disappointments and failures and missteps. And most of that has been my wrongdoing that had me really reevaluate my need for God and my dependency and need for salvation. So, how do we create space so that our kids can develop that own relationship with God without expecting them to know what we know
Yeah.
as, followers of Christ?
Right. Well, first, I think that a lot of times we think that we need to be like formally teaching our kids.
Mm,
And I mean, there's a space for that, but honestly, there's so much informal times that we can teach. We can be driving down the road, and from a young age, we would just say, okay, guys, we're going to thank God for whatever we see. And we would just start thanking God. God, thank you for that beautiful sunshine that's in the sky today. And then one of the kids would thank God for the trees that they saw. And I just made prayer like talking to God. It was normal. It was no big deal.
mhm.
I once read a book, and the author called it devotional living, where you're just kind of allowing your kids to see God woven into all parts of life. When they have a decision to make, I don't know the answer to this, but I know the one who's got the answer. Let's pray about
Mm.
this. So part of it is devotional living. The other part is my friend Brenda Yoder says, don't steal the struggle. And that's what you're talking about there, Lori, is that you've deepened your relationship with God through the struggles in your life.
Yes.
And you need to let your kids struggle so that they also can deepen their relationship with God in the same way. But honestly, today's parents want to keep kids from hurting
Mm.
Mhm.
and from struggling. And bottom line, that doesn't help them. It doesn't help them with their faith. It doesn't help them develop resilience. It doesn't help them feel like they can be a good decision maker. And so I think that a big part of it is we've got to be willing to let them struggle and not try to fix it.
That's really good.
Mhm. I wanted to go back to prayer for a second. So I wanted to ask you, what are your practical tips for parents on how they can teach their kids to pray? And you kind of already answered it, just pointing it out every day, like the everyday conversation.
Yeah.
But I wanted to understand, like, how did you go about it
Well,
in your own home?
you know, in the home that I grew up in, church was really important. We prayed at mealtime, but that was pretty much it. And then I'm developing this personal relationship with God, and I'm learning to pray, throughout the day in a very almost spontaneous way.
Mhm.
And so I want the same for my kids. So I just started doing it with them, like I said, in the car, or when they had a decision to make, or when things were maybe hard for them and they'd had a rough day. You know what? Let's talk to Jesus about that. At night, one of the things that I started doing with my kids is I wanted to expand how they prayed, because I was going to a moms in prayer group where moms gathered to pray for their children in their schools. And I was part of this, and they talked about praying in 4 ways: adoration, praising God for who he is, confession, telling God what you're sorry for, thanksgiving, what are you thankful for, and then supplication, asking God to supply our needs. So I started doing that with my kids at night, and I would just do fill in the blank.
Oh.
I would, this is when they were small, even, 4, 5, 6. And I would just explain, God he doesn't want us to just, like, what if all I ever did was ask you for things?
Right.
That wouldn't be much of a relationship, right? But if we can learn to talk to him in different ways. And so I taught them this. It spells out ACTS, ACTS, adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. So I just did fill in the blanks. And I would say, okay, I will do the first part of the prayer and you fill in the blank. So, God, I praise you because you are.
Mm.
And then they would fill in the blank with something. And then I would say, God, I'm sorry for. And then they would fill in the blank. God, thank you for. And they would fill in the blank. And then, God, please help. And they would fill in the blank. It could be, please help me, please help my friend. And that's how I began to teach them to talk to God in a more broad way.
Like, that makes me tear up. I don't know what is wrong with me, but it does, because it's so sincere, but easy,
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like, and it just, like, that's life-changing for our kids.
right. Because we're giving them a tool they can use for the rest of their life.
That's good.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So speaking of the rest of their life, right? So Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he gets old, he won't depart from it. So it's not unusual that, children are raised in Christian loving homes, raised in the church, but they get older, right? College years or even adult years, and they turn away from God. So what are we doing wrong? Are we just like beating them over the head with religion? Or like what are we doing wrong, Jill?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I do think that there are places that we could grow and we could do things better. I do think that the church often doesn't address the real parts of life. The real challenges. We're not nearly as open to talking about our struggles. And so I think our kids and this generation of kids really longs for authenticity.
Mm.
And so the more authentic a church is, the more authentic a Christian community is, the more authentic Christian parents are. I think that that definitely makes a difference in a child's perception of whether they want to carry that into adulthood or not. At the same time, I don't know that we're always doing something wrong. I think this is part of the journey.
Mm.
Is they've piggybacked on your faith, and now it's time for them to walk out their own. And sometimes that's messy. Sometimes they leave faith for a little while. We don't know. That verse says, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will return to it. Number one, that's not a promise, it's a precept. And the difference between that is it's kind of a principle. Okay, a precept is a principle. The reason that's important is when they know true north, they're more likely to return to true north, right? So that's in essence what you're doing. You're teaching them true north. And then when they get lost, they know where true north is. and they can return to that easier. And that's ultimately what that verse, is referring to. But I think that a lot of times they've just got to figure it out. And it's, just like you and I had to move into our own personal relationship with God. And whether we piggybacked on our parents or we didn't have it at all, and we, became a believer as an adult, it's a messy journey. And we got to let our kids figure that one out for themselves. So we have 5 kids, and 2 of our 5 are following Jesus. They were all raised the same way. They were all raised in the church. They were all chose baptism and chose to accept Christ in either their elementary or their junior high or their high school years. But they're on a journey, and some are wandering. 2 rock solid in their faith, but 3 wandering. And so we have to allow them that part of the journey. And our job is to pray. That is our job. And that is not a small, insignificant piece. No, it is really the call, especially once our kids are out on their own. Our job is to pray.
I love that.
Yeah, but it's not easy because, you want to go, I didn't raise you that way.
Yeah.
Or you want to go, oh, that's going to hurt. Don't do that. That's really going to hurt. But as I say in my Empty Nest Full Life book, pray, don't say. And
Oh, that's good.
that one I say to myself all the time, Jill, pray, don't say, pray, don't say. Because, I can say if they ask me. If they ask me their opinion, for my opinion, if they ask me for wisdom, by all means. But most of the time they're not.
They're just informing you at that point.
Or you find out, right?
Yeah. That's really
Mhm.
good. My grandma, who she passed away when she was 98. She was amazing, but she gave everyone at my bridal shower had to write down a little card with advice, and she wrote, "Just because you think it, you don't have to say it." So I'm going to add on to Grandma's card and say, to echo what you said, Jill, pray about it.
Uh-huh.
That
Pray,
is
don't
such
say.
good advice. Wow.
Yep.
That's really good.
Yep.
Well, Jill, this has been so fun. I know Lori and I are going to go back and take notes, and we just so appreciate your time. You're just such a wealth of knowledge, and you just have such a heart for moms in all stages of motherhood. And
I do.
I'm just so thankful you joined us. And like Lori said, you just made our dream come true by being on our podcast.
It's like Disney World. Dreams do come true.
So
that's great.
We're going to link in the show notes your podcast, No More Perfect with Jill Savage. Link your website, jillsavage.org. Thank you so much for chatting with us. It's been so fun.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Tried and Truly podcast. Be sure to subscribe, leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts, and check us out at triedandtrulypodcast.com to see our show notes and more. See you next time.